The Gaza Strip is facing a humanitarian catastrophe. Violence continues to escalate with devastating consequences for innocent civilians. An immediate ceasefire is not just a political necessity, but a moral imperative. Every day that passes without a cessation of hostilities brings further suffering and loss of life. The international community must exert all efforts to pressure both sides, Israel and Hamas, to agree to an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. This is the essential first step in preventing further bloodshed and alleviating the humanitarian crisis. The ceasefire must be comprehensive and include a halt to all forms of violence. This includes rocket attacks, airstrikes, and ground incursions. It is crucial that both sides respect the ceasefire and refrain from any actions that could reignite the conflict. The ceasefire should be monitored by international observers to ensure adherence and provide a sense of security for the civilian population. The human cost of this conflict is immeasurable. Thousands of innocent lives have been lost, including countless women and children. Families have been torn apart, homes reduced to rubble, and livelihoods destroyed. The physical and psychological scars of this conflict will take generations to heal. A ceasefire is not a solution in itself, but it is the indispensable foundation upon which all other efforts must be built. The international community must speak with one voice and demand an end to the violence. Diplomatic efforts must be intensified, and all available channels should be utilized to bring the parties back to the negotiating table. The time for action is now. The Gaza Strip is facing a dire humanitarian crisis, exacerbated by years of conflict and blockade. The most recent escalation in violence has only deepened the existing suffering, pushing the population to the brink of collapse. The situation is characterized by critical shortages of essential goods and services. Access to clean water, electricity, and fuel is severely limited, impacting every aspect of daily life. Hospitals are overwhelmed with casualties, struggling to function with dwindling medical supplies and equipment. The healthcare system is on the verge of collapse, unable to provide even the most basic care to those in need. Food insecurity is rampant, with the vast majority of the population reliant on humanitarian aid to survive. The blockade has crippled the local economy, leaving many struggling to afford basic necessities. The destruction of infrastructure, including homes, schools, and businesses, has further compounded the crisis, leaving thousands displaced and without shelter. The humanitarian situation in Gaza demands urgent attention from the international community. Immediate action is needed to address the critical shortages and prevent further suffering. Addressing the humanitarian crisis in Gaza hinges on ensuring unhindered access for humanitarian aid and personnel. The current restrictions imposed on the movement of goods and people are exacerbating the suffering and hindering relief efforts. All border crossings into Gaza must be opened immediately and unconditionally for humanitarian purposes. This includes the Rafah crossing with Egypt and the crossings controlled by Israel. The flow of essential goods, including food, medicine, fuel, and construction materials, must be facilitated to meet the urgent needs of the population. The process for granting access permits for humanitarian organizations and personnel must be streamlined and expedited. Delays and denials of permits are unacceptable and directly impact the lives of vulnerable people. Safe passage for aid workers must be guaranteed, and all parties must respect the neutrality of humanitarian actors. Furthermore, restrictions on the import of dual-use items, which have both civilian and military applications, must be reviewed and revised. Many of these items, such as construction materials and medical equipment, are essential for humanitarian purposes, and their restriction is hindering reconstruction and recovery efforts. The delivery of humanitarian aid in conflict zones is fraught with danger. In Gaza, aid workers risk their lives daily to provide assistance to those in need. Their safety and security must be paramount. All parties to the conflict must respect the neutrality of humanitarian organizations and their staff. Aid workers should never be targeted or obstructed in the course of their duties. Safe passage must be guaranteed for humanitarian convoys and personnel traveling within Gaza. The international community must hold accountable those who threaten or harm aid workers. Equally important is ensuring that aid reaches those who need it most. Transparent and accountable distribution mechanisms must be established to prevent diversion or misuse of aid. Local communities must be involved in the planning and implementation of aid programs to ensure their effectiveness and sustainability. Section 5. Addressing critical needs in Gaza. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza is multifaceted, requiring a comprehensive response that addresses the immediate and long-term needs of the population. Food insecurity is a pressing concern. Emergency food assistance must be provided to those facing acute hunger. In the long term, efforts must focus on supporting sustainable agriculture and rebuilding the local economy to enhance food security. Water and sanitation are critical areas requiring immediate attention. Repairs to damaged infrastructure, including water pipes, sewage systems, and sanitation facilities, are crucial to prevent the spread of waterborne diseases. Investment in renewable energy sources, such as solar power, is essential to address the chronic electricity shortages and improve access to clean water and sanitation. The healthcare system is on the verge of collapse and requires significant investment and support. Hospitals need essential medical supplies, equipment, and trained personnel. Mental health services are also crucial, given the widespread trauma and psychological distress caused by the conflict. Section 6. The invisible wounds of war. Mental health in Gaza. The people of Gaza, particularly children, have endured unimaginable trauma and loss. The constant threat of violence, displacement, and the destruction of their homes and communities have left deep psychological scars. Addressing the mental health needs of the population is essential for any hope of recovery and reconciliation. Psychosocial support programs must be integrated into all aspects of the humanitarian response. This includes providing counseling services, establishing safe spaces for children and families, and training teachers and community leaders to identify and address signs of trauma. Investment in mental health infrastructure and training of mental health professionals is crucial to meet the long-term needs of the population. The international community must prioritize mental health as an integral part of the humanitarian response. Failure to address the invisible wounds of war will have long-lasting consequences for individuals, families, and society as a whole. Section 7. Upholding international humanitarian law and protecting civilians. The ongoing conflict in Gaza is a stark reminder of the importance of upholding international humanitarian law. All parties to the conflict have a legal and moral obligation to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure. Indiscriminate attacks on civilian areas, including homes, schools, and hospitals, are strictly prohibited under international humanitarian law. The use of disproportionate force, where the anticipated civilian casualties outweigh the military advantage gained, is also unlawful. All parties must take all feasible precautions to minimize civilian harm and ensure that their actions are in accordance with the principles of distinction, proportionality, and military necessity. The international community has a responsibility to investigate alleged violations of international humanitarian law and hold perpetrators accountable. Impunity for war crimes only perpetuates the cycle of violence and undermines the rule of law. Upholding international humanitarian law is not just a legal obligation, but a moral imperative. It is essential for protecting civilians, ensuring accountability, and paving the way for a just and lasting peace. Section 8. Obligations of Israel and Hamas. Both Israel and Hamas bear distinct responsibilities under international law to protect civilians and uphold humanitarian principles. As the occupying power in Gaza, Israel has a legal obligation to ensure the welfare of the civilian population. This includes providing for their basic needs, such as food, water, healthcare, and education. Israel must also facilitate the work of humanitarian organizations and allow for the free flow of aid and essential goods into Gaza. Hamas, as the de facto authority in Gaza, also has a responsibility to protect civilians under its control. This includes refraining from using civilians as human shields, launching attacks from civilian areas, and storing weapons in or near civilian infrastructure. Hamas must also cooperate with humanitarian organizations and ensure the safe and unimpeded delivery of aid to those in need. The international community must hold both Israel and Hamas accountable for upholding their respective obligations under international law. Failure to do so will only prolong the suffering of the Palestinian people and perpetuate the cycle of violence and instability. Section 9. Towards a lasting solution. While addressing the immediate humanitarian crisis in Gaza is paramount, it is equally important to strive for a just and lasting solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The root causes of the conflict, including the occupation, blockade, and denial of Palestinian self-determination, must be addressed if there is to be any hope for sustainable peace. Meaningful negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian Authority must resume, based on international law and relevant United Nations resolutions. The goal of these negotiations should be a two-state solution, with an independent and viable Palestinian state alongside Israel, living side by side in peace and security. The international community has a crucial role to play in facilitating a just and lasting peace. This includes providing political and financial support for the two-state solution, promoting dialogue and reconciliation, and holding both sides accountable for their actions. A lasting solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not just a distant hope, but a necessity. It is the only way to break the cycle of violence, end the humanitarian suffering, and create a future of peace and prosperity for both Palestinians and Israelis.